All right, let's jump right into this explainer and really unpack how the stock market is regulated to prevent fraud and, actually protect everyday investors like you and me. We hear a ton of buzzwords about corporate governance, but today we're looking directly at the architectural blueprint that physically enforces it.
Because think about it, it's pretty much the ultimate question in the financial world, right? How on earth do you trust a faceless, multi-billion-dollar corporation when you're handing over your hard-earned cash? When a company issues stock, you are inherently trusting them with your capital. But without strict, legally binding guidelines, that trust relies purely on good faith. And let's be real, in the financial markets, good faith simply isn't a robust enough risk management strategy.
So this is the exact legal framework designed to solve that massive problem of corporate opacity. What we're looking at is the official gazette of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, documenting the 2015 listing obligations and disclosure requirements. It is dense, it is heavily amended, and frankly, it's absolutely vital to the integrity of the whole market. So we're going to break down the SEBI LODR, which essentially acts as the ultimate rulebook of trust. And look, this isn't just a list of polite suggestions. It's a comprehensive, ironclad regulatory framework. It mandates transparency, equitable treatment, and incredibly strict compliance for literally any entity looking to list their securities in India. It tells corporations exactly what they must disclose, exactly how they must behave, and exactly how they must treat their shareholders. Now, to make this hefty document a bit more digestible, we'll cover 5 main areas. 1. The Rulebook of Trusts. 2. Who needs to comply. 3. Protecting shareholders. 4. The board's responsibilities. And 5. The compliance enforcers.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the Rulebook of Trust, essentially the philosophical core of corporate disclosures.
The rules literally spell it out. They say, and I quote, "The listed entity shall refrain from misrepresentation and ensure that the information provided is not misleading." I mean, that is an absolute, non-negotiable legal mandate for timely and truthful disclosures. It sets the baseline expectation that accounting standards have to be implemented in both letter and spirit, making sure the interests of all stakeholders are actually protected.
Moving right along to Section 2, who needs to comply? Let's identify the specific players who are actually bound by these rules.
So, if a company issues any of these designated securities on a recognized stock exchange, boom, they are legally locked into this framework. And it's not just your standard equity shares on the main board either. This casts a super wide net. It covers SME exchanges, non-convertible securities, securitized debt instruments, and even units issued by mutual funds. Basically, the moment a corporate entity taps into public funds through any of these avenues, the LODR entirely applies.
Now, this applicability builds into a genuinely fascinating chronological rule. Applicability isn't just a one-and-done check, it's completely dynamic, based on market capitalization. Picture this. On December 31st, the stock exchange ranks entities by their average market cap over the previous 6 months. That ranking dictates their legal obligations starting April 1st of the following year. And here's the crucial part. If a company's ranking drops, they aren't just off the hook immediately. The rules only cease to apply if they remain outside that threshold for 3 consecutive years. It's brilliant because it completely prevents regulatory whiplash and ensures sustained long-term compliance. Okay, Section 3, protecting the shareholders. This is all about shielding you, the everyday investor. Right out of the gate in Chapter 2, the framework hammers home this idea of equitable treatment. What does that mean for us? Well, whether you own 10 shares or 10 million shares, the rules fiercely protect your voting rights and your access to information. It explicitly mandates that processes shouldn't make it unduly difficult or, crazy expensive for minority or foreign investors to cast their votes. It ensures you always have a real opportunity to participate effectively in key corporate governance decisions.
Now, a huge piece of protecting everyday folks is stopping insiders from unfairly enriching themselves. So on one side, we have related party transactions. The text carefully defines these as any transfer of resources benefiting a related entity or person demanding incredibly strict oversight so funds aren't just siphoned off out the back door. But on the flip side, it smartly exempts normal corporate actions. It specifically provides exemptions for things like uniformly paying dividends, offering rights issues, or even employees making normal retail purchases from the company. It perfectly closes those dangerous legal loopholes without accidentally choking out normal everyday business operations.
Which brings us to Section 4, the board's responsibilities. Let's look at who's actually guiding the corporate ship.
So the regulations actually lay out 14 massively heavy obligations for the board of directors. But rather than read a textbook to you, we can group the board's massive mandate into 3 core operational themes. First up, providing strategic guidance and closely monitoring risk. Second, ensuring the absolute rock-solid integrity of the accounting and financial reporting systems. And yes, that includes independent audits. And third, focusing on the future with proper succession planning for key managerial personnel.
These are some of the most critical, specific duties. Obviously, the board has to maintain high ethical standards and manage conflicts of interest. We'd expect that. But look really closely at those final 2 points. The text explicitly mandates that the board must have the ability to step back and actively challenge the strategic assumptions of executive management. And get this, it literally warns the board against encouraging an over-optimism that could mask real financial risks or expose the entity to excessive danger. They are legally required to be the voice of sober reality in the boardroom.
Finally, Section 5, the Compliance Enforcers. This is where we get into ground-level accountability.
Enter the compliance officer. And listen, this isn't just some part-time gig or a fancy secondary title for a mid-level manager. This is a legally mandated in-house watchdog. They have to be a qualified company secretary in whole-time employment, and they are placed not more than 1 level below the board of directors itself. They're officially designated as key managerial personnel. Their entire, singular job is keeping the vast corporation strictly in line with these regulations.
So what does their actual day-to-day look like? Well, step 1 is ensuring absolute conformity with regulatory provisions in both letter and spirit. Step 2 requires them to coordinate and report directly to the board, the stock exchanges, and depositories. But step 3, this is where it directly impacts you. They are legally required to actively monitor the designated email address for investor grievances. So when you have a complaint, this high-level executive is legally bound to oversee its resolution.
3. That number right there represents months. 3 months is the absolute maximum amount of time a listed entity has to fill a vacancy for this critical compliance officer role. They can't just leave the seat empty, and they can't just throw some unqualified interim person in the chair to save a few bucks. This strict timeline really proves just how seriously SEBI takes the presence of this internal watchdog.
And here's the fun fact about how these rules scale up as a company grows. The second a company becomes so massively huge that its in-house share transfer facility hits 1 lakh or 100,000 shareholders, it triggers an immediate, mandatory requirement. At that massive scale, they must either register with the board or appoint an external registered share transfer agent to manage the facility. It basically ensures that as a company's footprint grows, its infrastructure for handling your shares remains completely rock solid.
So that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. As we've unpacked in this explainer, the SEBI LODR is an incredibly thorough, meticulously crafted rulebook of trust. It actively anticipates loopholes, it mandates ethics, and it places severe, heavy burdens on corporate boards. But we have to ask, is any document, no matter how totally exhaustive, truly enough to outsmart the ever-evolving complexities and high-stakes maneuvering of the global stock market? Honestly, it's a question every single investor should keep in the back of their mind.